Hello, everybody, again, and welcome to our webinar, Building a Modern Cybersecurity Strategy for Small and Mid-sized Businesses. And as I mentioned before, my name is Eduardo Ulloa, and I am the head of marketing at Envision Consulting. And thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we'll be discussing probably one of the most important issues that any small, big, or of course, huge businesses face, which is cybercrime. Cybercrime is, as you know, a fast evolving landscape, and small organizations, particularly, are the most vulnerable due to lack of resources and knowledge. So, our goal today is to serve as a building block to a more modern cybersecurity strategy that you can bring to your organizations to help them become more resilient as a business and more importantly, it's actually bringing this discussion outside of the IT practice to become more of an organizational risk discussion. And today, our presentation, we expect it to be around 30 to 35 minutes, and we'll leave around 15 minutes for your questions and discussions. So, if you wish to ask a question, please feel free to send them using the question box that you can see on your screen. And we will also be recording this session to make it available for you to review at your convenience. And today, to share with us how small and mid-sized businesses can more effectively build a modern cybersecurity strategy, let me introduce our presenter, Dan Ross. And Dan is a network engineer with us at Vision. And he's, of course, our resident cybersecurity expert. And he has, for the last several years, worked with many of our clients conducting IT security audits, implementing best practices, and, of course, making sure that their cybersecurity plan is in place over time. And for those of you who may not be familiar with Envision, we are an IT consulting, management, and support firm, and we specialize in partnering with smaller, mid-sized organizations in the greater Washington, D.C. area, and many of them also across the United States, offering them IT management, monitoring, 24/7 support, strategic IT planning, cloud computing services, and security solutions. So, without further ado, let me turn it over to Dan. Welcome.
Hi, thanks, Eduardo. Well, today we've got a few things we want to talk about. We're looking at the current cybersecurity landscape, how it's going to affect your businesses, and how we're vulnerable to malware and cybersecurity risks, and in general, trying to think of cybersecurity as less of a technology issue and more of just a regular old business risk, like other things that management typically has to face. And finally, in the vein of that management, we're looking at a more effective way of managing those risks within your business. So first thing we want to look at is what is cybercrime? We hear this stuff a lot in the news. We hear it a lot going around in various trade organizations, things like that. We see some really big headline stuff about data breaches and leaks and usernames and passwords getting out on the internet and companies being hacked and all kinds of things like that. Well, the truth of the matter is that this stuff is just getting bigger and it's changing all the time, and there are a lot of different organizations and groups active, both good guys and bad guys, all across the internet. The ones that we're mostly looking at are the criminals. These are commonly referred to as hackers or attackers or all kinds of things like that. There's a lot of different names, but at the end of the day, these are people that are using technology and networks to either break into your network or to steal information or to leak information. The groups, we can generally group these into three categories. We consider these to be somewhat separate. So we've got organized criminals. These are anywhere from, a single guy, the stereotypical, loner in his mom's basement, that kind of thing. But the truth is that this can be a group, often very large, often very well financed, crossing, multiple countries, and they focus entirely on making money out of this kind of thing. And as we'll see, there's a lot of money involved in this kind of stuff. We've also got hacktivists. You've probably heard of some of these guys in the news, both good guys and bad guys. It all kind of depends on your point of view, really. They tend to be the ones that break into companies' databases and release information. They put stuff up on WikiLeaks. They take down websites. They do kind of cyber graffiti. They often are not as organized. They're not often as well funded. They're usually kind of volunteer type guys that believe strongly in a cause. And then our last group are the state-sponsored hackers. These are also ones you've probably heard of, especially lately in the news. You've got groups operating out of China. You've got groups operating out of Syria. You've got operating groups here in the Washington, D.C. area, the NSA, the CIA. You hear about these guys. These are really the big dogs that you have to look out for. The sad truth of the matter is that even with some of the best security you can put in place, there's a good chance these guys are going to have more resources than you will, and there's a good chance that given enough time and effort, they're probably going to break in. So we're mostly going to be focusing on the first two, and that's what we'll move ahead with now. So just some numbers to show you what's going on with all of this stuff. This is primarily based around business incidents. We're looking at about 378 million victims per year over the last few years, and this is coming from the 2013 Norton Cybercrime Report, and 2014 I think was actually an even bigger year as far as that goes. We're looking at $113 billion in global annual losses. It's a huge amount of money, and 38 billion of that alone is coming from companies based in the United States. So again, those cyber criminals, they know where the money is, and they're going after it. So we look at some of the big name stuff. Okay, we've got Sony, we've got Target, we've got JP Morgan, Chase Bank got hacked, Anthem got hacked. These are all really big names and kind of big targets. So we think about ourselves, oh, we're this small company, nobody really cares what we have. Why would they break into our stuff? Why would they steal our stuff? We refer to that as security through obscurity. And while it is a somewhat valid security measure, they can't hack you if they don't know you're there. It's a little bit opposite of what we're shooting for with a lot of our business goals, which is to make ourselves a bigger name, to let people know who we are and what we do. And so those two methods are kind of at odds with each other, and we don't think it's a very good strategy in the long term. So let's see what happens to small businesses. They're actually targeted more than large corporations. Those large corporations have a lot of resources. They have really good defenses. Cyber criminals know that. They're not interested in, going after these big targets unless there's a big payoff, and it takes a lot of effort to go after somebody like that. Whereas the small businesses, and we can see here 44% of them have been struck by a cyber attack in one form or another, they're considered more the low-hanging fruit. 70% of these data breaches target companies with fewer than 100 employees. And the average cost associated with these cyber attacks is nearly $9,000. This is based on a survey of a bunch of small businesses after they've reported these kind of cyber attacks. Now, that can be anything from, just replacing hardware or paying some company to come in and clean up, or even lawsuits and stuff like that. $8,700 may not even be, that might just be the beginning. Now, in the financial sector in particular, we've got a lot of stuff going on. Again, they know where the money is, and we look at an average of 350 malware events per week worldwide in the financial sector. That's not just, oh, I got a piece of malware on my computer. We're talking about 350 unique new ones emerging all the time. And this is from the 2015 Verizon data breach investigation report. That just came out a couple of weeks ago. It's kind of scary stuff. 74% of RIAs reported having had a cyber attack, either directly or through an associated vendor. 3 out of 4, that's pretty high. So we have to look at this as a business risk, okay? This isn't just something for your IT guy to worry about who will occasionally bug you to buy a new firewall or something like that. We're looking at a legitimate business risk, because we're dealing with stolen financial customer data. We're looking at lost productivity, downtime, your server goes down, your email goes down. There's a lot of stuff that we rely on from the internet today in order to conduct our business. And I think we've all had incidents where the internet goes out or something like that, and we know just how much it really sets us back. This isn't just a power outage, though. So we're looking at risk management. Okay, you have to look at your infrastructure, identify where you're vulnerable, what assets do you have in your network infrastructure that would be damaging to your company should they fail or be compromised or be leaked onto the internet, that kind of thing. And then we have to figure out what's the likelihood of this actually happening. So, that one's going to take a little bit of judgment, but mostly you want to find out, okay, if these servers go down or if this asset gets compromised, how much is this going to cost our company in terms of all the various expenses that might be incurred? And then from there, we need to develop a plan to try to mitigate that kind of risk versus vulnerability and say, is it worth the cost of putting some sort of mitigating measure in place versus the value of the asset? So, somebody compromising, your network printer might not be such a big deal, but somebody compromising, say, your Salesforce login might be a huge problem. So, how are we most vulnerable to this stuff? We have to be able to evaluate this. So we're going to look at this a little more closely. Ways we're the most vulnerable aspect is email phishing. This is what it seems to be based on all of the reports and everything that we're seeing. 23% of recipients of phishing messages actually open them. We've got 50% actually opening these emails within the first hour of receiving them. And I think most shockingly to me, 11% of these people will open attachments without having any idea who these emails are from or what is in the attachment. That's 1 in 10. One of the statistics that I saw in one of these reports was that in order to get a 90% success rate with a phishing attack against an organization, you only need to send 10 emails on average. 10. So you got to think about, how's our email working? And are my employees going to click on this kind of stuff? Next up, we've got web browsing and what we refer to as malvertising. It's malicious advertising. This has become increasingly common over the last couple of years, mainly because people have started to wise up and train their people a bit more about email phishing. That used to be even more prevalent, and as prevalent as it is now, it has actually dropped a little bit. But to make up for it, they've started to come up with some pretty clever ways of injecting their attacks into regular old web browsing. So, for example, last November, Forbes.com, which I know a lot of people in the financial sector probably end up on at one point or another, ended up being compromised by an attacker who was able to purchase advertising space through, I think, a network similar to Google AdWords. And basically, they got advertisement in this network, which is largely unmonitored, and it propagated through the various advertising affiliates until eventually they popped it up on Forbes.com. And, to give them a little bit of credit, it was only there for a couple of hours. But when you're dealing with high traffic sites, legitimate high traffic sites like Forbes.com, you end up with thousands or even hundreds of thousands of visitors in just a couple of hours, and all of them are being exposed to this malicious advertising. And when I say malicious advertising, we're talking about like Flash videos or Java-based advertisements that execute code on the computers and end up leaving behind backdoors and Trojans, things like that, in your end user's computer. And it takes very little for them to be able to do this. Really, all you need to do is go to the web page for not even a minute, and as soon as that ad loads, it starts running its code, and you're in trouble. So, and we're talking about legitimate websites here. What Symantec says is about 62% of these malware infections that are coming onto their end users that they study are coming from legitimate websites that have been compromised by an attacker. So it's not just a matter of really blocking them from illegitimate sites so much as being able to protect against a range of things. And as I was saying, they're getting in there using vulnerabilities in Flash, Java, Office, things like that, stuff that you're using every day just as part of your legitimate business practices. So they take advantage of what's called a zero-day vulnerability, or basically a bug in the software that these attackers have discovered, and these bugs actually sell on the black market for a significant amount of money. So there's an entire industry behind uncovering these vulnerabilities and sort of trading them among criminals. And finally, human error and ignorance. we hate to say it, but the weakest link in the chain is where it's going to break, and oftentimes the weakest link is the end user themselves. I mean, I know even myself, I get malware from time to time just because I made a simple mistake, and I know it's very, very common for people to think maybe they know enough, or maybe they're smart enough to stay away from the bad websites and stuff like that, but that's really not enough. You can't just trust that your users aren't going to do something that might end up compromising your network, because uh, these criminals that are involved in this operation are constantly trying to innovate and find creative new ways of getting into these systems. And they use a system referred to in the security industry as social engineering, which is a method of, well, in the old days they used to call them con men. It's basically what this is. And they try to manipulate your users into giving away private proprietary information, getting them to click on links, or giving away passwords, all kinds of things like that. So what we have come to find is that the traditional risk management methods that we use for this kind of stuff are simply not enough. We've got a changing landscape for the way our businesses operate. We've got users bringing in their own mobile devices. We've got cloud computing, cloud-based platforms that we're using for databases, things like that. And then we've got users that are just either working from home, or they may work in another state or even another country, or frequently on travel. And so that kind of thing means that it's very difficult to maintain a static perimeter of your network that you can actively defend. So things like firewalls, that expensive box that your IT manager told you that you need to buy for your company, well, absolutely a necessary thing to have, can't protect your users that are remote and that are outside of the network. It's only going to protect the network that it is in front of. And your endpoint antivirus, your Symantec and your Malwarebytes and all of these sorts of box products that you install, combined, these only stop on average 30 to 50% of the attacks that come in, because they're just constantly innovating new ways of coming up with this stuff. And the problem that we run into, especially like with antivirus, is that they're very much dependent on the companies themselves coming out with new malware definitions and updating those end clients. And there's just a lot of moving parts in there. And there's sort of this arms race on the internet between the antivirus guys and the malware writers. And they're all trying to predict what the other one's going to do all the time. And so it's really a changing landscape all the time. And we can't just rely on antivirus. We can't just rely on firewalls. We have to take a more proactive approach. So how do we make this more effective? The goals of this are for you to have a greater visibility into everything that's going on your networks. You need to know, who's going to what websites, what services are we using, all of the different components fit together and become what we refer to as the attack surface, okay? There's all of these different things everywhere that they touch the internet. There's a possibility that they may have some sort of vulnerability that could eventually be exploited and turned into an attack. So we have to be aware, like, are our users using Dropbox? Do our users have Google Drive? Are they going on their Gmail accounts? Are they plugging in flash drives? Do they take their computer home at night? Do they work out of a coffee shop? All of these different things can cause a good security policy to go right out the window, because the policy may not have the kind of plan for those eventualities. So what we want to do is monitor this stuff. We want to keep track of everything that's going on, and we need to keep in mind that the humans that are actually using these systems are going to be our weakest link, because even if we have all of our other stuff hardened and secured, all it takes is one user to make one wrong click and all of this stuff can be compromised. So focus on the entire process, okay? We have to remember that threats are coming from the outside in, and short of having some sort of malicious employee, that is, threats are generally going to be coming from the outside, and we want to prevent them from ever reaching the network in the first place. And if they do come in, and there's a good chance they will, so we may as well assume that they will eventually come in, we want to have a plan in place to be able to contain it, to monitor it, and to clean it up as quickly as possible before it can really snowball out of control. So what we do is we think of cybersecurity as layers of defense. Okay, we use a combination of things so that it will form in a really effective filter to prevent these things from really getting to the core of what's important in our businesses, the core assets. So we want to block malicious sites. We know there are malicious sites out there. There are millions of new ones that are cropping up every day. We want to block those sites at the network level. We don't want our users ever to access them and get infected. We want to prevent the malvertising links. We want to block malicious links in email and apps so that anything coming in that's potentially hazardous, we want to be able to block that stuff. But if something does get through, we also want to keep our systems up to date. We got to keep our Java, our Flash, our applications, they all need to be patched so that that window of opportunity for a malicious attack to make it through will hopefully just hit a patch system and it won't go anywhere. And finally, assuming that we do get something that does make its way through that gamut of defenses that we've already got in place, we want to block the malware once it's on the machine from being able to call home and release data. As long as we can keep it isolated on the machine, we at least maintain some level of control over what the malware can do. And finally, it doesn't really do us any good to have done all of that stuff if we can't let anybody know that it's happening. I've seen time after time after time systems where we go in and we, there's problems with the computer network, and we take a look at a system and it's just riddled with malware and nobody even knew it was there. We've got users that are just clicking ignore and, oh, well, we'll just restart the computer and things like that. And there's just so many things going wrong, and nobody was even aware enough to even start the cleanup process. So real-time alert monitoring of threats and containment and things like that, your staff has to know what's going on, or else we can't really do anything about fixing it. So let's look at the layers. We've got our outside threats, we've got our core networks. First step, we want to control web traffic through various means. The main means of doing this is through a system called DNS, the Domain Name Service. And what we're going to do is we want to be able to maintain a list of active threat sites that we absolutely do not want anybody on our network visiting. There are various means of going about doing that. We've got content filtering through an endpoint firewall. Is a very common one. I know just about every major manufacturer offers a service like this on their firewalls. There are also third-party companies like OpenDNS that offer web traffic filtering that are often very, very effective at this kind of thing. Our next layer is automated patch management. All of these patches that come out for Java, Flash, Windows, all of that kind of stuff, they come out with a fairly high degree of frequency. Some of them come out weekly, some of them come out daily. Windows and Microsoft updates Windows every month. And if you're not updating with those patches, you can come into a lot of trouble. Like I know a number of different vulnerabilities through either Windows servers or even Windows workstations. Frequently there are malicious botnets active on the internet that take advantage of these vulnerabilities, and some of them, the only reason they even exist is because there are just so many machines that haven't had a simple Windows update. So we definitely want to keep up on all that patch management, and we want to make it automated. We don't want to leave it for people to just do it at their own convenience. Finally, in the middle here, we've got our antivirus and our malware scanners, our active protection. You've got a couple of different ways of approaching this. There's really two ways of doing it. You've got active protection, which is going to prevent anything from being able to get onto the computer. Okay, so this is your Kaspersky and your Symantec and your various antivirus programs like that you typically pay a subscription for, or something like that. And then you've got anti-malware scanners. These are the reactive component. So once you've got an infection, you run this kind of scanner and it removes it. Now these work really well in tandem. Active protection is pretty good at stopping stuff from coming on, but again, only 30 to 50% effective, and it relies entirely on getting those definition updates from the internet. So attackers have wised up to this. They know, if we can compromise the virus updates, if we can change our virus to make it look like something else, maybe it won't pick it up. But that's not to say you don't want to have this on there. Again, layers are what's important. You want to take advantage of every piece of technology that you can. Next up, the 24/7 monitoring, as we already discussed. The other stuff's all great, but if you don't know that a certain machine missed a patch because it was offline, if you don't know the new machine that you installed on the network hasn't had its antivirus installed yet, if you don't know that users are bypassing your content filtering, so that they can look at Facebook at work or something like that, it's not going to do you a whole lot of good. It's you spend all this money on your defenses and then you just leave the gates open. That's not helping you at all. So you definitely want to keep an eye on all of this stuff. And then finally, and probably the most important, continuous training for your employees has to take place. You have to have policies to regulate so that they know clearly what they can and cannot do with their computers, so that they know procedures for what should happen should there be some kind of event, to help them identify phishing emails that make it through the spam filter. They need to be reminded of this stuff fairly regularly. It's not enough to just train them in this when they first get hired, because even a year later, things can change dramatically. You need to have constant reminders of everything. And at the end of the day, the sad fact is that really it only takes one employee to make a mistake, because what we're looking at is 74% of the data breaches, these big name data breaches, can be traced back to email phishing, which means that one employee at Sony or one employee at Chase clicked a link that they shouldn't have and ended up causing the entire organization to be opened up to a malicious attacker. And that's scary. So all of this stuff, it's expensive, it's complex. What are all of these products? What do we need? How does a small or mid-sized business go about getting all of this stuff in order? First off, you don't need to come up with anything on your own. There are plenty of these technologies already available on the market. They're typically very good, and they are not actually that expensive. You can bundle these together to get a nice collection of different resources all acting in tandem to protect your network, and you can do this on a budget. It is scalable. You can have small companies doing this, you can have mid-sized companies doing this, all the way up to the really big guys. They all do this kind of stuff, and this is especially what you want to look at. So you need to do your research. You need to work with your IT staff. You need to work with whoever's managing the networks. Everybody needs to work together on this kind of stuff. So engage your IT managers in this kind of stuff. I'm sure if you approach them and you say, hey, where are we on cybersecurity? Do we need to make any changes? They've probably got a laundry list of stuff that they would like to do. Definitely engage them on that kind of stuff and find out what it is that can be done to better protect your network, because we know it's a threat and we need to manage that risk. If you need a helping hand, third parties absolutely have specialized tools in order to deploy these systems, to monitor these systems, to manage all of this without you necessarily having to get terribly hands-on with it. And additionally, you can get other guidance, like if you don't have IT staff, if you need some consulting, or you need to find out how can we grow our network, or how can we expand this kind of stuff and still keep it secure, you want to look into this kind of thing. So what's our takeaway here? We know that small and mid-sized businesses are the most vulnerable in this area. We know that cybersecurity is more of a business risk and less of something that you can just leave to your IT staff. We know that a layered, in-depth approach is really the best way to minimize risks at all stages of an attack. We can't focus on just one level. We have to look at it from all of them and assume that these things are going to trickle through, and we need a way to deal with them responsibly. And there are cost-effective ways for you to do this. You just have to go through and evaluate the different products and things like that, and find a mix that fits the budget and the requirements of your company. They do need to be tailored to your environment, because all of these environments are different. So there's not really a good one-size-fits-all solution there. And finally, we definitely want to focus on our employee training. This is probably the number one thing you could do to improve the stability and the safety of your environment is to get your employees really aware of what it is that they're doing, how their actions can affect the rest of the network, and really make sure that you've got policies that have an enforceable ability to make your employees do what needs to be done. And finally, work with your IT manager, work with your IT management company, your MSP, and make sure that your current tools that you have in place are effective, evaluate them, find out what you can do to improve them, because we do want to see improvement across the board. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dan, for all your insights on the discussion, and thank you everybody for your questions. I actually have a good number of them that are really good ones that came through. And the first one is if there is any particular organization that you think it's the biggest cyber threat.
Organizations that I think are the biggest cyber threat. I think it depends on what you consider to be a cyber threat in terms of against businesses and that kind of thing. We know we've seen a fairly large number of industrial espionage type stuff going on with state-sponsored actors. A lot of the general security community tends to point the finger at China. A lot of that stuff is, in my opinion, somewhat unsubstantiated, but I do think it's important to take steps to secure intellectual property, because it would sure be a shame if they got in there and started selling your information to other vendors. In addition to that, the cyber criminals, I think, are really the big threat that you have to deal with. This is stuff that I, as a network engineer and security consultant, deal with on a sadly nearly a daily basis. You see companies where somebody got a piece of malware on their network, stuff like ransomware, where maybe you've heard of it. There's a couple of different variants going around, but I believe CryptoLocker was the big one, where they basically go onto your network and they take your network drives and they encrypt all of your data so that you can't get to it, and then they tell you, hey, pay us $500 or you're never getting it back. It's that kind of, I don't want to say garden variety, but it's a very common problem. And as much of a problem as these big threats are, those little ones, it's the kind of death by a thousand cuts. You end up just getting setback after setback after setback, and really taking the steps to secure your network is going to improve your ability to just do business on a daily basis, I think, more than worrying about the big threats.
All right. And the next question is related to putting the strategy into practice, especially, I mean, like for on the business side of things, sometimes it's hard to think of how you actually put this into place, all the layer security strategy. So can you explain how you, and of course, for that matter, Envision works with clients to implement this layer cybersecurity?
Sure. Well, what Envision does is we keep basically a curated list of applications for each of these layers of protection. So we go out and we find what we think are the best programs, and we put them to the test. We've got clients that are running this stuff, and we put it in place either on our own systems, we put it on our client systems, and we are constantly evaluating, like, how are these performing? And what we do is we take these applications, the best ones that we can find, we bundle them together into a product that we call Envision Cyber Shield. And basically what we do with this is we deploy it on a per machine basis for our clients. And so it scales up, any size. It'll work from a group of, even just one person, all the way up. And it's a relatively hands-free system because we use a 24/7 monitoring remote deployment. And once it's on there, it pretty much runs itself, which is really, really what we want. We need as much of this to be automated as possible, but with an alerting system so that if something goes wrong, people that know what to do are alerted to it and can react appropriately. So for those that don't necessarily have someone like Envision that's keeping an eye on that thing, it's certainly going to be a challenge. You have to go out, you have to do some searching. You want to work with some people that are possibly more familiar with it than you are, but it is entirely possible to research this on your own and educate yourself just by doing things like you're doing today.
All right. And now, as far as incident response, what would you consider the number one item to have in place when recovering from like a data breach or a hack?
Oh, well, you need to have a recovery plan, is the thing. You need to identify ahead of time uh, exactly what it is that you're going to do in order to bounce back from this kind of thing. That's the whole point of having those policies, is that you don't have to come up with it after the fact. You have an incident plan already in place. So typically what this is going to consist of is a combination of backups and safety measures that you have in place. So for example, if you're running something like a SQL database for your client information, your customer information, you want to have a mix of backups. You want to have on-site backups. You want to have off-site backups, and you need to have a way of recovering those. You need to make sure those backups are working. Same thing goes for anti-malware and for updating systems and stuff like that. As nice as it is to be able to set and forget something, you also need to periodically review it and make sure it's working. So always be reviewing that kind of stuff, and you should be able to recover from most things pretty quickly.
All right, and we have one which is very interesting, and maybe, as he says, is maybe a little unrelated to our discussion, but certainly interesting. And he's been curious about hackathons, and there have been hackathons in California, New York, Germany, other countries. Most of
Sure.
them are universities. What are those hackathons, and like, what's their purpose? Do you know? Can you shed a light on
Yes,
that?
this is what I was talking about actually a little bit more toward the beginning, is we typically refer to these attackers as hackers. It's a bit of a misnomer is the problem. I guess you'd call it the art of hacking is really more of a mindset. It's the ability to understand a system, how a system works, the rules of a system, and then be able to manipulate the system in order to get different results. That's really what hacking is all about. And unfortunately, there have been a bunch of bad apples who have, over time, kind of given hackers a reputation for, being the bad guys. When the truth is, you've got hackers on both sides, and you've got what they refer to as black hat hackers and white hat hackers, and then there are some that sit sort of in the middle. They refer to them as gray hat hackers, unsurprisingly. Um, it's all mostly semantics is the thing. So a hackathon is, these guys get together, they have an idea for something that they want to build. I think Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook is very famous for this kind of stuff. He'll get, a bunch of these, very creative programmer types together in one room, and they'll just say, okay, for the next 24 hours, we're just going to work really hard and we're going to build something cool. And at the end of the 24 hours, they frequently have something cool. And that's how a lot of these, little mobile applications and I don't know if you're familiar with these little quadcopter drone helicopters that people fly around with their iPads and stuff. These are all just results of these kind of hackathons. And it doesn't really have anything to do with cybersecurity per se, although certainly somebody could come up with like a new kind of antivirus or something at one of these. But it's definitely a cause for confusion for a lot of people, is because that terminology is used somewhat interchangeably, and it's not really terribly accurate. That's why I prefer the term attacker when we're talking about an actor with malicious intent, as opposed to a hacker, because you've also got security researchers like myself who others would refer to as hackers, although I don't think many of them really call themselves hackers.
Excellent. And we have a couple more. And sorry, are there any devices that are weaker as far as easy to access to threats, like laptops or cell phones, whereas like iPhones or Androids? And can those with no tech background, what can those with no tech background do to practice a safe mobile risk management?
Mobile is really tricky. There are a couple of things going on with mobile that are definitely cause for concern. Um, in terms of just plain old security, from the reports that I've seen, Kaspersky did some really good studies on this stuff. The Android platform has kind of a two-edged thing going on for it. One, it's an open platform, which means that anybody can come along and develop stuff for it. But two, it's an open platform, so anybody can come along and develop stuff for it, which means you get a good mix of good and bad. The majority of malicious mobile software is typically found on the Android marketplace, and that's just because they don't keep as close of an eye on that marketplace as, say, Apple does. Apple tends to like to keep everything very neat and tidy and under their control, whereas Google is kind of embracing the hackathon mentality of, bring your cool ideas to our platform and let's see what they can do. The problem with that is that you don't have quite so many of those security, minded stuff going on there that's really trimming out the bad stuff. And in Google's defense, they do make an effort to remove that stuff. They're just not as stringent with their submission program as Apple is, and so more gets through. And one of the things that I've noticed over time is, as seems to be kind of a rule with this sort of thing now, is that convenience and security are kind of opposing forces. The more convenient something is, the less secure it tends to be. The more secure something is, the less convenient it tends to be. You can think of it like passwords. If your password's 1234, it's very convenient, but it's also not very secure. If you've got a big, long, 20-digit password, it may be very hard to remember, and it takes a lot more time to type it in, but it's significantly more secure and much harder for somebody to guess or break into. So in terms of the mobile space, things you can do. Typically, I would avoid joining a Wi-Fi network if you don't necessarily know whose it is. I would definitely avoid accessing any kind of sensitive information from your mobile device on a network that you don't necessarily trust or control. For example, banking apps and things like that. It's very, very easy for somebody to create a mobile hotspot, name it, hotel lobby Wi-Fi, and allow people to just get on it. And from there, they're able to very easily monitor network traffic and kinds of things like that, steal passwords, all kinds of awful stuff. So, keep it on the data plan, switch it over to the Wi-Fi when you have a trusted Wi-Fi that you can use. And typically try to avoid doing anything sensitive while on the go like that, or at the very least make sure that you're using encrypted connections, so HTTPS websites, secure email, that kind of thing, so that at the very least the data being sent over the Wi-Fi is encrypted and just that much more difficult for somebody else to read.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. We just had one last quick question about the who's winning in terms of bad guys versus good guys. You never hear, or normally you don't hear, like FBI, CIAs making arrests on as much as you do on like other kind of crime. So, do you know anything about that?
Yeah, a little bit. The thing that I think we have to kind of keep in mind is defining who is and isn't a good guy or bad guy. A lot of these people, it might be argued, are good guys. For example, the NSA, CIA, a lot of these guys are working in American interests. So if you're an American company, you might consider them to be a good guy, and maybe they're doing a good job. On the other hand, maybe you're not an American company. Maybe you're the German chancellor, and you're a little annoyed that the NSA has been snooping on you. So it's hard to say. What we do know for sure is that the prevalence of people's ability to get into networks and snoop and spy and steal and do all kinds of malicious things is increasing. And as these systems get more and more complex, it just introduces more and more vulnerabilities. There are projections that the security industry needs to grow by about 1 million consultants over the next year just to keep up the pace of all of this stuff. But on the bright side, you do have some very talented people working in our favor. You've got all of these, antivirus companies. You've got Google doing some very impressive stuff with regards to encryption and security and all of that kind of thing. So I'd say overall, It's just a changing landscape, and it's kind of hard to say who's winning per se, but if you can stay on top of it, there's still a pretty good chance that you can protect everything that's important, and that's really what we need to focus on.
Well, thank you so much, Dan, and thank you everybody for your time, your questions, and for being here with us. And so, before we go, if you have any further questions or have any additional information, we have Dan's email here, dross at envision-consulting.com, and he'll be very glad to answer any questions. And as I said, we'll also make today's broadcast available for you to review at your convenience. So we will communicate with you, all of you, via email, giving you details on how to access it. And lastly, if you are inclined to do so, please feel free to follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. Our Twitter handle is Envision IT Cloud, or on Facebook. And thank you, everybody, and have a really good day.